Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a 2020 electoral map in which Joe Biden wins in a landslide scenario and why this isn't actually too far from reality. We're looking at an electoral landscape in which Donald Trump is down 8% nationwide on top of the GOP being down 8.1% nationwide according to the generic ballot. Overall, the GOP and Donald Trump are at roughly the same standing, whether it's the House elections, Senate elections, or the presidential election. Right now, the Democratic Party is entering in with energy from the 2018 midterms that the Republican Party did not experience in 2012 and, was able to bring some of it into 2016, but that largely had to do with the fact that Donald Trump was a very different candidate and Hillary Clinton was a very dislikable one. Joe Biden completely outperforms Hillary Clinton in terms of approval rating, and is completely outperforming her in every single swing state. Let's take a look at what this map would look like. So a lot of these states wouldn't actually change. We'll talk about the margins once we actually get closer to the finalized electoral map, but for right now, I'm going to characterize all of the Trump states and Biden states that are considered safe on a normal electoral map. This includes, obviously the West Coast and states for Trump, such as North and South Dakota. Pretty much these never change. The only times these have ever been competitive, at least for some of them, are in off-year elections, in certain referendums against an incumbent president, and even then, it's still very difficult for a lot of these too well-known party figures to run as a Democrat and try to make South Dakota competitive or try to make North Dakota competitive if they don't actually come from that state and haven't previously served as a governor or as a House of Representatives member. The reason why a lot of these Democrats do well in Republican states and Republicans do well in Democratic states is because of the fact that they have a connection with the people. They've served them in public office before, whether it was Secretary of State or literally as Lieutenant Governor, whatever it might be. They're known well nationwide and trusted with the name. For example, my governor, Larry Hogan, his father served as a representative from my district before Steny Hoyer took over. Larry Hogan ran against Steny Hoyer, came within the closest margin of any Republican candidate, but his last name was pretty well known around the state, so he easily won the Republican primary. And then it was 2014. It was a Republican referendum year, I guess you could say Larry Hogan did very well here. But Joe Biden is he doesn't really have a connection to a lot of these Republican states. Even though we're talking about a landslide, we're not going to see a 49-state sweep with what we saw with Ronald Reagan or with Richard Nixon, or even a 48-state sweep with FDR. Really, not 48, I guess, winning all its states but 2. But if we're looking at this electoral map, you see a lot of these states remain solid red. And I'm actually going to characterize some of them, I guess, narrowing them down just so you can see what a landslide would actually look across all of the states. But pretty much, Biden would dominate across almost all of these swing states. And there's a reason for that. He's leading in a number of them, so we're not going to focus too much on states such as Virginia or Colorado or New Mexico or Nevada or New Hampshire or Minnesota. The reason for that, if we're talking about a landslide, Biden is absolutely carrying every single Hillary Clinton state without a doubt, including Maine. So I forgot to characterize that one. But pretty much we wouldn't be worried. The Biden campaign wouldn't be worried about losing any of these states. Obviously, they should be. They should definitely be pouring money into all of these swing states. But right now, these seem pretty locked down based off all of the data that we have compiled. If we take a look at literally Minnesota is a perfect example because it was the closest out of all of them. Biden leads Trump by a pretty significant amount. So 10% in the most recent poll, and looking back, he led him in almost every single poll. So Minnesota was competitive in 2016, doesn't look like it's shaping up to be, and that was the closest out of all of these. Actually, New Hampshire was the closest vote-wise, so we can go ahead and take a look at New Hampshire as well. Let's do this one. This way it gives you a graph. It's a little bit easier to understand that way, so you're not averaging it yourself, but Biden has a 9.1% lead over Trump in New Hampshire. Moving on, let's take a look at what a landslide would have to give us a general idea about. So we're going to characterize these, like I said, in all solid colors, and then move on to the margins later on in the video. So obviously the Rust Belt would have to go blue. Landslide scenario, Rust Belt, blue. That makes sense, and that's not too unlikely. Biden is dominating in the Rust Belt. He's leading by roughly his same national margin. So in Michigan, he's up 8%. In Wisconsin, he's up, I believe, 7%, but that could have changed. Yeah, 7%. And then in the state of Pennsylvania, Biden is up 6%. So these are pretty significant leads. I think Michigan actually matches the national average. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are slightly under, but it's an 8% lead nationwide. And obviously, Hillary Clinton underperformed the national average by 2%. In these battleground states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. But if Biden's up 8% and you adjust for that based off how wrong it was just 4 years ago, Biden still wins all of those states. So Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I think those are the first 3 states I think will flip in favor of the Democratic Party. I do have to discuss whether or not I think Florida and Arizona are considered lean or even likely Democratic states at this point, given the margins that they have for Joe Biden. But we all know they will likely revert to a closer election just because of their strong Republican identity in the past. These 3 states go to Joe Biden. In this scenario, Biden would also have to carry Florida. I think that's a given. It's 29 electoral votes. Trump really can't be doing well in any of these states if we're talking about a Biden scenario, Biden landslide scenario. Arizona would join the Democratic column. Arizona actually isn't too far of a stretch either. This is a state that did go to Donald Trump in 2016, but you also have to realize that had a huge turnaround in 2018 for the Democratic Party, the likes of which we haven't seen in previous elections, and now Biden is up 4% in this state. Same thing in Florida. I mean, Florida's margin for Biden is pretty strong. It's a 6-point lead statewide in a state that Donald Trump carried by 1%. So that's pretty significant. Trump was up 0.2% on election day, won by 1.2%. So it was a 1% difference in favor of the GOP. Adjust that to this. Biden still wins by 5% statewide. So Florida absolutely would have to go to the Democratic Party. Looking over in the South, I think it's very realistic that Biden will carry North Carolina at this point in time. I think he's the favorite to carry North Carolina. I think the state itself will see a very large amount of African-American voters, given that there's no intentional voter suppression. I think that voter suppression is also something that's going to be very rampant around this country. A lot of major cities that possibly have, for the sake of the Republicans, I'm not saying Republicans are the only ones that will be participating in voter suppression. I definitely think that's something that both parties have done in the past. But for this election, let's say we take Wisconsin for a perfect example. In the 2020 Democratic primary, which just so happened to coincide with the Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, they reduced the number of polling booths in Milwaukee from 186 down to 5. 5 in a state as big as Milwaukee. I mean, in a city as big as Milwaukee. I mean, that was insane. Obviously, there were concerns about coronavirus, and there were concerns about in-person voting. I understand that. But for some of these states, you can't vote absentee without a reason. Most of these states you can, thankfully. That doesn't undermine our electoral process. But for some of these states, for some of these governors to come out and say, or some of these state representatives come out and say, coronavirus is not an excuse for for voting absentee, that's when we start to get into the idea of voter suppression impacting this election. So assuming that this is not happening, I think the Democratic Party will perform a lot better just because of the fact that obviously people that are in opposition to the Democratic Party's what is expected to be a landslide at this point, not a landslide, but more so a wave in the Senate, in the House, in the presidential election, will try to suppress that. And that's a very real reality. That happened in 2018 in the Georgia governor election. That's proven. There's a lot of things that have happened across this country that are not really spoken about because, yes, both parties have participated in voter suppression, but right now I think this is a very big issue given that voting by mail is going to be very important. There's issues with that North Carolina 9th district about ballot harvesting, whatever it might be. That's going to be a huge issue, but that's for another video. We're focusing on a Joe Biden landslide. So I know this may come as a surprise to many people, but I actually just made a video about this yesterday. In Texas, Biden is leading by a very narrow amount, but if we're talking about a landslide scenario, Biden could win Texas. I know that's shocking. It's Texas, it's 38 electoral votes. A lot of people think no way in hell that Biden carries Texas. However, the data isn't necessarily agreeing with that. I think there's a recent poll that just narrowed up the race for Morning Consult, where Biden is leading by 2%. But if you take a look at the difference between May Morning Consult and July Morning Consult, it goes from Trump +7 to Biden +2. That is significant. That is a 9-point swing, what actually is ending up to be an 8-point swing. But the reason for that, back in May, the Black Lives Matter movement was not a thing. Obviously, it was a thing, but it was not as mainstream as it is right now. That was May 26th, the last day that this poll was taken, right after George Floyd. And then a couple months later, Biden, sure, decreases his margin by 1%, but roughly stays the same with the exact voting bloc, 47%. Biden only increased 4% of the vote. Trump's comments have made him lose voters in Texas and across this country. So Biden leads in Texas right now. I think it's a realistic scenario if Biden was to have everything work perfectly for him. His VP nomination was to go off without a hitch. His DNC was to go perfectly. Biden very well could win in a landslide scenario, and we're looking at a map that definitely could show us what that would look like. So for Georgia, I know Georgia seems to be another stretch. Trump won here by 6%. However, He's only narrowly leading here. Biden actually led for a pretty significant portion of June and July. So Trump is only ahead by 0.7%. And if we look at the most recent numbers from YouGov, Biden is up 1%. Now, the Democratic Party, I don't expect to carry the Senate race here whatsoever. I think Biden will be the best performing Democrat in Georgia, actually in a very long time. So the last time Georgia went blue was in 1992, Bill Clinton. It was competitive somewhat in 2008, but McCain had a pretty substantial win here. Romney decimated Obama in 2012. Trump narrowed up this race because it was Donald Trump. It wasn't Hillary Clinton that was doing it. It was Donald Trump that narrowed up this race. And now we're looking at an election where Joe Biden seems like a much more viable option for never Trump Republicans than Hillary Clinton did. So Georgia, I think in a scenario where, Biden was to win in a landslide, he could carry Georgia. And this is what I mean. We're talking about a landslide. This is not my election projection. This is not how I expect 2020 to go. This is a sort of best case scenario for Joe Biden. And actually, a lot of these states aren't reaches. We'll talk about that near the end when we go ahead and focus on the margins. So Ohio and Iowa, I'm just going to go ahead and characterize them. You see them as gray, you know they're going to go blue, just because of the fact that I left them up as a gray. 413 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 125 for Donald Trump. So if we're talking about why this actually is a possibility, let's go ahead and focus on the margins. For Joe Biden, he likely will carry Colorado, Nevada, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Minnesota by likely margins, joined by the Rust Belt. And based off all the data that we have right now, Florida should be, a likely Democratic state, but it's not. I don't think it will be. I think Florida is lean. I think North Carolina is lean as well. I think Arizona at this point has moved down into the lean column. I think Maine at large will be likely. And that leaves up a number of electoral votes that we need to characterize. For the remainder of the, I guess you could say, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska second, I would consider to be lean. And Maine second district, these are all going to be tilt races. And the reason for that is because the Democratic Party, if they were to win here, it would be by the narrowest of margins, and it would be a miracle for the Democratic Party. Obviously, a landslide is something that if they did truly want to make the election results seem legitimate and, have no questions as to whether or not, what if this went differently, or if Donald Trump tries to undermine the election results, if they win by a landslide, it doesn't matter if Trump says Florida was fraud. It's 29 electoral votes. Take that one out, Biden still wins. Take out Texas, Biden still wins. Take out Arizona, take out North Carolina, take out Georgia, take out Ohio, take out Iowa, take out Nebraska second, take out Maine second, take out Maine at large. Okay, take out New Hampshire, Biden still wins the election with those three states in the Rust Belt. So if they were to have this type of win over Donald Trump, there could really be no question about the legitimacy of the election results, just because the election was such a large victory that everything would have to be messed up in order for the system to have been completely done, which I can say has happened in other forms in our country, but I think the electoral process actually should be very much trusted and hasn't really shown us otherwise in the past. So Biden finishes this off with 413 electoral votes. I talked about the states that I think would narrow up for Donald Trump. I still think that some of these states would just be a little bit narrower than they have been in the past, but not enough to actually flip them into, lean for Donald Trump or move them over into the Joe Biden column. A lot of these states are just pretty much going to stay the same, regardless of the nominee on the Democratic side or even on the Republican side. These states have become so polarized, not just the safe states, the entire country has become so polarized to a point where some of these people won't even consider voting for a Republican or a Democrat, regardless of what happens to them or regardless of what's baggage is attached to them as they enter the election. Alabama's 2017 Senate special election is a perfect example. Alabama voters are very Republican. Even when Doug Jones was running against a potential child molester, he only won by around a percentage point. And that's important to note because it just shows us how polarized this nation actually has become and gives us a very good idea as to why these states are going to be voting very solidly blue or solidly red, regardless of who the nominee is going to be. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Please remember that this is not an electoral college projection. This is just a map talking about Joe Biden could possibly win in a landslide because that map doesn't seem too far-fetched based off the data we have right now. There's a video that you can go ahead and watch, and then a playlist for my 2020 election predictions if you want to check those out, and then a Discord link in the bottom left of the screen. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.